So here's the thing, pick a guy that's easygoing and one that you like, because you can't change them. I don't know if anybody's ever told you that, but they're going to stay the way you meet them for their whole life. And in fact, they might even get worse.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Rosie and Bill Show. Our guest this week is a comic who simply tells the truth. She's been landing punchlines on radio, television, and in comedy clubs for decades. Please welcome to the Rosie and Bill Show, the Latin Diva of Comedy, Monique Marvez. Hi, Monique. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so very much. And it's so funny when you say for decades. Yeah, I've been doing this for 30 years. There's a comedian named Dave Williamson out of Miami who's quite good. And we started out in Miami at the same time. And forgive me. We both lived in Miami at the same time. He used to sneak into comedy clubs to see me when he was a teenager. And his family is very prominent. Williamson Cadillac is a huge dealership. So now he lives in a fancy house in LA. He's a successful comedian. He books me for his shows, and he always intros me by saying, "This is the reason I do comedy. I used to sneak into shows when I was a kid. And by the way, he has gray hair and a dad bod." And I'm like, stop. You make me sound old as Methuselah with that intro. And number two, I look better than you naked. I mean, not that I've ever seen him naked, but I know I can imagine what he looks like, and I know what I look like. So I was like, cut it out with that intro.
There you go. You got to put your foot down.
Well, hey, everyone. Thanks so much for tuning in. We appreciate each and every one of you. And we also appreciate our first and longest running sponsor of the show, Tom and his team of insurance professionals at the Malin Agency. If world-class customer service and doing business with someone you can trust is important to you, give Tom and his team a call today for all your insurance needs. Monique, I'll tell you, I actually wanted to kick things off with a little bit about Miami, but before I do that, just want to let our viewers know that right now you're coming to us from a cruise ship in Alaska. So that means a couple of things. Number one, it's probably not that warm, even though it's August in Alaska. And number two, if we have some issues with the Wi-Fi, that's actually a pretty darn good signal for a ship, but we know sometimes it can be a little temperamental. But you know what? We're going to plow through because that's what we do. And we are just so happy to have you here with us. So I mentioned a moment ago about Miami, as actually you did before that. So I'm curious, before you got your start in comedy, radio, all the things you've done over the years, what was it like for you growing up as young Monique in Miami?
Well, first of all, I grew up with a very peculiar and wonderful family. First generation American. That's a lie. Second generation. My dad was born in Puerto Rico, which is an American territory. And my mother was born in New York. But 100% immigrant experience, all four grandparents from different countries. I'm Puerto Rican, Cuban, and Venezuelan. Very loving family, but filled with peculiarities and oddities, and which is why I'm a comedian. And, very loving. And, interestingly enough, Miami was a magical place. I mean, they call it the Magic City. Mm-hmm. I grew up with Jackie Gleason filming his show, and the Miami Dolphins having the, never defeated season, which is still the undefeated season still stands, So there's so many things about my childhood, the beach, the glamour, the Fontainebleau, our relations would visit from other countries and we'd drive them on Miami Beach, and the marquees would have, Tom Jones. And so it was a very magical, delightful, and within my own family, peculiar place to grow up.
Monique, you just mentioned the undefeated Dolphins. That was in 1972. That was at least 10 years before you were born.
Well, yes, indeed. But I heard about it.
Yeah.
And also the longest football game played in history was the Miami Dolphins versus Kansas City Chiefs game. I think that record still stands. And, I grew up with my dad had Dolphin season tickets since forever. And I grew up in just a very, I'm sure everyone says this about their hometown, but it was wholesome. We went to the beach with picnic baskets and all the cousins, and it was a very wholesome and fun way to grow up.
Monique, were you the outgoing, look at me perform kind of kid?
Not at all.
How did you get your start in comedy?
I got my start in comedy later in life. I wasn't an open micer till I was 27. I had a whole life before that. I was married, I was divorced, I was a cosmetic executive. I worked for Estee Lauder and Lancome and Benetton. And then at one point in my mid-20s, I thought, if I can make this much money pushing lipstick, what's the biggest thing I can sell that isn't a car? And it was medical malpractice insurance. So my last day job was selling professional liability to physicians. And, even to this day, people say, like, when did you know you were funny? And my answer is Tuesday, whatever day of the week it happens to be, I just say Tuesday. Because I'm actually a nerd. I'm a super nerd. I was a reader. I played piano. I was in the gifted program. I was a mega nerd. But what always happened would be I would say what everyone in the room was thinking, and everybody would laugh. And I'd look around and go, like, what is funny about this? Like, I am telling you, I remember being in a crowded store as a kid. I'm in a crowded store, and the workers were all kind of in a huddle arguing about their schedule. They're like, well, who's on now? Who's on break? They were in a huddle while the store is just filled with people wanting help. And I finally just yelled at the top of my lungs, who's on now? Because they're all like, when is the break? And who's on dinner? And who's closing? And, and I just yelled out in the middle of the store, who's on right now? And the whole store burst into laughter because the huddle ended. Everybody kind of turned around like, we have a store full of people. We have a job to do. I had a relative, a Marion, let me be clear. I had a relative die who was, an abusive alcoholic. And everybody was crying. And I was a little person. And I looked around the room. I said, why is everybody crying? Nobody liked him. And the neighbors are bringing pound cake.
A star was born at that moment on the comedy circuit.
Yeah, well, I think I got a pinch in the back of the arm from my mom, like a really hard twist. But yeah, that was me from birth.
That is awesome. So, Monique, I'm curious, when you got started, when you kind of switched from that day job and started doing comedy, what were some of the early lessons that you learned sort of in that transition from selling insurance to doctors to making people laugh?
I was very lucky because the comedy scene in the early 90s, which is when I started, was very analog. Like you talk to other comics. Nobody was like, hey, have you seen my numbers or my clips? Or it was analog. Like a person would come into a comedy club that was a known headliner. But unless it was, to give you an idea how long ago and how innocent, I remember meeting Ray Romano when I was an open micer, and he had just won some giant contest, like the San Francisco comedy. Like nobody knew him from Adam's House Cat, but he had just won this big contest, and his wife was very pregnant with what I now know to be his twins. His twin sons are in their 30s, and she was very pregnant, and all the comics just hung out at like a diner downstairs from the comedy club, like all of us. There wasn't any like, you're an open micer and you're a middle, and it was very democratic, so to speak, in a non-political sense of that word. We were all sitting around, and I remember just hearing Ray's wife telling him, we're going to make this happen. Like, don't worry, we will, you're talented, and we're going to see it through. And it's so weird to be a part of that tiny little piece of comedy history where here's a guy who was like, well, I'm glad I won, but you're pregnant, so now I got to quit. And sitting there and hearing his wife say, no, we'll figure it out. You're going to keep going.
Wow. And he did. He sure did.
Absolutely. Wow. And I've worked with Ray many times since, and I've worked with Brad Garrett, and they're lovely. Both of them are lovely men. But a lot of the bonds that I forged early in my career to answer Bill's question very directly, I learned the code of ethics because back then comedians had a road code of ethics. The headliner always took the middle to lunch at least once and gave them advice. That was back when clubs ran Wednesday through Sunday, and you had Thursday was non-smoking night because you could smoke in a comedy club. And there was a code of behavior that was very honorable to the art form and very honorable to, it wasn't about competition. Even today, I got an email from a guy that wanted to book me and I wasn't available. And he said, can you recommend another woman? And I recommended a woman that I always do named Karen Runtowski. She's replaced me a couple times, but I very much still follow that code. I still recommend people for jobs. I still mentor people when they ask. I still give my opening acts. They'll be like, I don't want to bother you. And I'll be like, it's no bother. Can I ask you a couple questions? Of course. I do my level best to kind of bring that old school camaraderie into the business now that kind of doesn't exist anymore.
I love that, Monique. I mean, you are so right because things are so different in all aspects of the entertainment business. But that picture you painted at the diner really resonates with me just because I remember even doing theater back in the day where that's what everyone did. After your show, you went out to the diner and you just, that was kind of the time where you bonded with everybody. And it's really kind of a lost thing in some ways. So it's thanks for like kind of sharing that with us.
I want to see it come back. When I play New York, the Comedy Cellar still kind of has a little bit of that. They have a comics table and the comics do sit there in between performances.
Wow.
That's great.
Monique, I just want to interject something because I know Rosie's going to ask about another aspect of your career in just a moment. But after listening to what you just said, and I appreciate what Rosie just said as well, I just want you to know that when we've seen you perform, we just think you're one of the best. You're absolutely hilarious. Love your specials. But the thing that really got to us was the person that you are, and watching your Facebook Live videos, seeing different clips of you, reading different articles. It's the person, and that just came through in that answer you gave. And I just want to thank you for that, just for the person that you are and what you said you want to bring back. It just means a lot, and I appreciate it.
Thank you. Well, one of the things, if this brings you joy, a lot of people don't understand young people now, let's just say under 22 for the sake of this conversation. And I have nieces that I know you've heard me talk about in my act because they're the light of my eyes and I talk a lot about them. Now they're 20 and 22. And my brother married late in life, my remaining brother. So I have a 5-year-old niece. And what's important is that they're not like us, but in many ways they're amazingly better. And I say this because I'm sort of the Gen Z whisperer. During COVID, my comedy exploded. Somebody called me and they said, you're trending on TikTok. I said, I'm not even on TikTok. It's Chinese spyware. And they were like, no, well, go check it out. And they sent me a screenshot and hashtag Monique Marvez. I didn't even have my own profile at the time. And the one I have now is quite not great. But had 190 million views. Hashtag Monique Marvez. And it was young women lip syncing me. So this is my favorite COVID story. A friend of mine who I worked with in Miami, and he was a writer for the New Times, and he did a lot to sound the trumpet to sort of bring attention to me. I got my first Montreal Comedy Festival because he wrote me up in the New Times as a talent to watch on South Beach. I started in alternative venues and gay bars, and I wasn't even doing comedy clubs because my comedy was very unique and very different than what was going on at the time. And this guy, his name is Rafael Navarro, very prominent writer, writes for The Guardian, from a very well-to-do family. And I've known him since the beginning of my career. Well, during COVID, he moved to London, very erudite, educated family. And he's eating breakfast one day, and his 23-year-old daughter comes out to breakfast and says, Daddy, I just found this Latina comedian. She's about your age, and she's from Miami, and maybe you've heard of her. And Raphael was like, what's her name? And she says, Monique Marvez. And Raphael was like, know her. I was at her wedding. She was at our wedding. She's known me and I've known her forever. I championed her career. And of course, he said in his, we've since been in touch. It had been many years since we spoke. And his daughter's name is Anastasia. And she, at that time, he was like flabbergasted that she was like, oh, she's my shero. I've shared her with all my friends. I adore her. I can't believe you know her, Daddy. Can you call her? I want to talk to her. I need to know this woman. And Raphael asked her, Anastasia, I'm her age. I'm cool. I'm a writer. Like, you're not this excited about me, and I'm your dad, And Anastasia was like, well, he said, why? Describe her. And she said, well, don't walk up on her on the wrong side. It's not that she's violent. She is the violence. She's pure energy. And this is from a 23-year-old. So the thing about it, Bill, is that I've always been unusual in that I'm unfiltered and I'm very authentic. And it used to work against me. I tell people what got me smacked, divorced, and fired is now paying my rent. But oddly enough, young people it's a sniff test. It's catnip. They smell you and you either delight them or they throw it to the ground. Their processes are so fast because they've grown up in an age where everything is in their hand. Like when we were little kids and we went to Bible school, we had that song, he's got the whole world in his hand. Well, people under 25 have never experienced a world where they didn't have the whole world coming at them in their hand and had to make decisions like, what I call spiritual Tinder. Yes, no, I like, I don't like, I want, I don't want. And I'm grateful that my voice, my authenticity, the way I see the world seems to cut through the clutter for them. And the people that are making my career are the kids. And that's very exciting because I already know that we like me, that I like you, and you like, we're grown-ups, we know. But to have the kids like me gives me an opportunity to bring a lot of important messages to them from a person they're willing to listen to.
Right. And from a humorous point of view, but important
absolutely
nonetheless. And I'll tell you, that is like a big thing to tap into the younger market, like without even trying, but just being yourself and doing your thing. That's definitely a special ingredient. And all of that said, Monique, because now you've had so many accomplishments, what's still on the to-do list for you?
Well, I'm going to put it out there. I actually have someone of note, this part I'll keep to myself, that has been tracking my career for 8 years. She met me at a comedy club, was very taken by me, lost touch, as happens in Hollywood. And then during COVID, somehow I got into her algorithms and she started watching the 3:30. And she said, your show, I want to develop a show. I want to do a multicam sitcom called Auntie Monique that is a setup for you to deliver these amazing messages. So I've never done that. I've written for television, but I've never had a show centered on me. And I've not done a consistent podcast. I've had a few people reach out to me about doing a podcast, and that's still on the horizon. And completing a book. I have a 1,200-page manuscript that needs whittling and editing and maybe chopping into a couple of books. But it's basically since the last 16 years of my career where I started to pick up real speed and do radio and get paid real money and write for television. And you need leisure when you're not in the building struggle phase and suddenly you can take a breath. I think it's so important to share with people that are still in the building struggling phase. Hey, these are the things that worked for me. Maybe they'll work for you. But I do it in a series of autobiographical, very funny stories.
Yeah, and I have to tell you, Monique, the 3:30s, the shows the Facebook Lives that I've seen, I love them because when we started our show 6 years ago, our initial goal was to be a source of positivity, inspirational, and fun content on social media to sort of offset all the negativity out there. And you're doing exactly the same thing. And I love it. And I love how you sign off, some of the key messages you kind of come back to and say. So what inspired you to start doing that?
Well, at the beginning of COVID, I was in Australia on a cruise ship and I almost got stuck in Sydney. I was on the last flight out of Australia. It was crazy. And a friend of mine, I don't call him a manager because I'm unmanageable, but somebody who does manage talent, who's a friend of mine, said, Monique, don't go dark because of COVID. Your fans don't come to you just for comedy shows. You have fans from your radio days. And he said, please figure out a way to interact. Now, I've coined the term tech-tard because I'm so typical of technology, but I figured out how to go live. And the first day was March 25th, 2020. I took about a week to get over my jet lag from Australia. And I went on and I said, I'm going to do this for 40 days because this whole situation feels biblical to me. Mm-hmm. So I'll do it. And who knew, that we were going to be in it for so long. But once it got started, then when COVID started to wind down, I said, okay, as long as you keep showing up, I'll keep doing this. But when you go back to your lives and go back to work, it'll wind down. And not only did it not wind down, and not only did they keep showing up, but more people showed up. And then it went global. And now every 330 gets between 1,000, 2,000, 2,500 views. And I get messages from everywhere from the Canary Islands, Kenya, Australia, the UK, all over the UK. So I believe today might be day 1,600. I believe I'm going to be late today. I told them I'd be late because I'm with you guys. But today might, if it's not, it's 1,599.
Wow. That is incredible. Congratulations on that. I mean, you definitely strike me as someone who does not waste time. Like, you seem to really make the most of every minute of the day. So, I guess that's why you're accomplishing so much. And definitely, Monique, please, when you come to the Philadelphia area, let Bill and I know whenever that may be, and we'll come and see you in person. But in the meantime, we wish you luck with all of your activities and things you've got in the fire. We hope that the TV show happens. We'll put some good juju out for that. And
I believe in good juju.
Yes.
Lord knows.
And just thank you so much for coming on the show, and enjoy the rest of the cruise.
Thank you so much for having me. It'll be my pleasure to come back on when I get the show and share the ins and outs with you.
Perfect.
That'd be awesome.
Yes. And as usual, we thank you, our viewers, for tuning in, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Have a great week.
We bond over music. That's the thing we bond over on Sirius XM. We go between hits. They like hits is channel number 1, and we go back and forth, listen to my channel, their channel, my channel, their channel. We talk about things, and they're just adorable. And they hear a song, and they don't know it, and they're not listening to the DJ. They don't have to do that because they can Shazam it. That's a magic trick. They take the phone out and they wave it around in the car. Know what song it is. And then they put it on their Apple playlist. Bam, bam. Just like that. It's the playlist. $13.99 a month. Guess who pays the subscription? My mother. Say, you know what Auntie Monique used to do to get music? They go, what? Back in the 1900s? I go, what? I go, first of all, when you went in the car as a family, somebody would yell, shotgun. You can't do that now. People react strongly. But you would yell, and then you'd get in the front seat, and whoever sat in the passenger seat was in charge of the music. And it wasn't an app, and it wasn't connected to your phone. It was a radio with buttons. And you had presets, and you had an antenna. And you would go eat at a burger joint, and you'd get an antenna topper. You had a little ball on the top of your antenna that let your neighbors know if you were what team. If you were Team Whataburger, you know what I mean? Or you were a Jack in the Box, whatever, you had that antenna topper. You're looking at me like this is a history lesson. Yeah, you call your parents when you get home, and you tell them how lucky you are. I'd be born in Shazam days. It's true. I tell him, I said, you would be listening, and then you would hear a song on the radio, and then you would run to the store, and you would hum it to the guy behind the counter. So he could try to figure out what the new hit was, because the DJ didn't say the name and you wanted to buy it. You know, and you'd be like, You go, oh yeah, you spin me right round like a record, baby. Yeah, you'd be, oh, that's, and they always had a bad attitude because everybody that worked in a record store was in a band and they didn't want to be there. I think they're the parents of the people that work at the Mac store now. Second generation aggravated retail people.
This week's episode has been brought to you by Doherty & Company Insurance Services for all your business and personal insurance needs. Our friends at Tennis Addiction in Exton, PA. And the Malin Agency, where exceeding expectations is how they do business.